Hi, and welcome back to the HSP Connection with me, Philippa Robinson.
And me, Robbie Lee. This is where we share our stories, insights, and strategies to help fellow highly sensitive people navigate their own path to living a fulfilling and meaningful life. Philippa, what are we talking about today? And maybe a better question is, who are we talking with today?
Well, Robbie, yes, it's exciting. We have a guest. We really love our guest episodes. And today we have the wonderful Josh Speraneo with us here. Josh is a certified master life coach who works with HSPs, and he's a friend of the podcast. He's, I think, safe to say he's listened to all our episodes. And, you came to the 100th episode of my previous podcast as well. So, it's really lovely, Josh, to have you here today, and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. Thank you for having me. It's definitely, as I mentioned, it's one of my favorite shows, one that I do tune into every single week. I'm excited when I open up Spotify and it tells me there's a new episode, or sometimes it'll come up in my YouTube feed, and there's just always something worth hearing in every episode and some sort of insight that I'll take away. And like I mentioned, I really appreciate your vulnerability, the stories that you tell, the insights that you share, the way you tie those together. And just so often there is a deep and meaningful lesson throughout the course of the conversation. And it also just practical insight or exercise to walk away with as well. Which for those of us who are still, within the first couple of years of our HSP journey, I think it's extremely helpful just to hear how other people are solving some of the challenges that we run into. And also hearing that it's okay to struggle along the way, that we don't have to have it all figured out. And the way that you guys share your stories about where you've struggled and how you've overcome those struggles, as well as the victories. I mean, all of that is amazing. And so those are the reasons I keep coming back every week.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's
wow.
Very grateful for those lovely words, and thank you. That's kind of what we're trying to do. So it's really lovely to hear that. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's why we keep coming back every week. And yeah, thank you. And when we asked you to come and be a guest, in fact, hopefully we're going to do more than one episode, but for this episode, we specifically wanted to talk to you about your experience as an HSP man. Because we've talked a lot, as you said, we share a lot about our experiences, and, but we're women, clearly. So I think it's hard at times coming to learn about ourselves as HSPs. So from my experience, and I'm sure Robbie will say the same, HSP women and all that society tells us, and that's hard. But we can only tell our story, and we would love to hear your story. And I wondered if that's where you could start. Perhaps could you tell us your story about discovering you're an HSP and kind of what that means for you?
Absolutely. So I think it's interesting because it's so much easier to put the pieces together looking back than it is going forward. And so I spent a long time growing up wondering why I felt different, wondering why I seemed to feel things on a deeper level, wondering why I often seemed to feel out of place in certain circumstances or among my peers. Not to say that I was the only one who had deep emotions or deep feelings, but just to say that there weren't many of us that were wired that way. And so it was an interesting journey going through school and just learning basically along the way to hide my feelings or to keep them to myself, and feeling almost like they were a burden to other people that I needed to just go and process on my own and then come back. And it just felt safer that way at times. And so really, in terms of finding out that I was a highly sensitive person, my journey was a little bit different in that I found out that I was an empath before I found out that I was a highly sensitive person. And so I kept walking by the book, The Empath Survival Guide, at a bookstore, and something about the title and something about the concept of being an empath stuck out to me. But it took me a while to even go over and just open it up and start perusing it and learn, okay, what does that mean to be an empath? And as soon as I read over the little checklist in the book, I thought, oh, that's me. And so that one was kind of cool. It's like, oh, it's, this unique side to me, this, unique attribute that I have. And as I was actually reading the book, I came across the term highly sensitive person. And I think I had heard it in conversations before that, but it was almost dismissed, or there were some of those stigmas that can be attached to the phrase. And I thought, oh, I don't know that that's something I'm interested in. And it just so happened that at one point, the more I thought about it and the more I thought about that term, it kept coming up in different contexts. And so I finally went on to Elaine Aron's site at hsperson.com and took the self-test. And I scored very high on that. And I thought, oh, there is something here. What does this actually mean? Because, as you know, it's so many times when the phrase highly sensitive person is brought up, there is a negative connotation to it, this thought of being fragile or frail or weak. And what I found as I dove into learning more about the subject was, wait, no, there's so much value here. This is so cool. And, it's, yeah, we look at, let's say, the DOES acronym, depth of processing, overstimulation, emotional responsivity, empathy, and then sensitivity to subtleties. And I looked at those and I thought, well, the overstimulation part, yeah, that's not always fun. But those other attributes are all superpowers. Those other attributes are all incredible. And I thought then the other aspect of it was just, it's helped me so much to feel at home in my own skin, because now I understand that there is a genetic trait that makes me different. It's not that I'm some sort of a freak or outsider, or that I'm broken, which I think for many years I carried those thoughts with me, and the world didn't do anything to contradict that, those thoughts. But what I found is that realizing that this is a genetic trait and realizing all of the strengths that come with this really has been incredible. And what I've been able to do, and I think it's similar for most of us who are highly sensitive, we look back over our journeys and we look at the struggles and we realize, oh, wow, this is why I struggled in that area growing up. This is why I've always felt things on a deeper level. This is why I've always wanted to take my time and observe a situation before I just dive right in. And this is why I notice all those little quirks that other people seem to overlook, sights and sounds and smells and things in the environment that other people seem completely oblivious to. And so, like I said, so it's just an interesting journey, and almost in a way, I feel like I'm growing into myself now that I have this knowledge. But I think so many of the greatest aspects of our personal growth journeys and our personal evolution it comes out of self-awareness. And I think this was a huge piece of the puzzle that I didn't even realize I was missing. And now that I have it, it's brought so many other things to light and clarified so many other things. And so I long story made extra long. I guess that's been the journey for me.
It's wonderful to hear you say that, and I'm sure I'm resonating with quite a bit of it, and I'm sure Robbie is. I'm going to ask her in a minute, but and I'm sure there are people listening who are really going to resonate with that. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
What did you think? What were you thinking, Robbie?
I mean, my head was like on bobble over here. I really, really resonated with what you were talking about, how when maybe you first were hearing the term, it's kind of like, oh no, that's not something I want to be associated with. Like, that's like, yes, exactly. Because that was the same for me. Like when I first heard the term, what I would associated it with was the weaknesses, the overstimulation, like those things. And it's like, well, I don't want that to be me, Mm-hmm. And as I have learned more about it, that's why it's so important to me now to help people be aware of the strengths of sensitivity, and how you talked about discovering kind of the superpowers of it and realizing, like, oh, no, this explains why I'm able to do things in situations that other people are just completely oblivious to. And yeah, I really, really connected with what you were talking about.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I love that you were talking about the book, the book about empaths that you kept looking at, or you kept sort of like, it was like you were walking past it and it was sort of quietly calling to you, and you were like, no, I'm not listening. And do you reckon that was your highly sensitive intuition really drawing you in that direction, but you just weren't listening for a while?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's I think intuition is something I've gotten more comfortable with over time, but it's almost a muscle that I just wasn't using for the longest time. And I think maybe either it didn't feel safe or it just didn't feel as natural. And I think sometimes as we grow up, we almost lose touch with that part of ourselves, because as kids, it's completely natural to have a kind of stray thought and follow it and see where it goes. And then as we get older, that's either frowned upon or discouraged, or we think, well, what if it leads in the wrong way? And we second guess it. And so it is something that I think I learned to tune into. And that's a great example of a time where it was something about the word empath and something about the title of that book that kept calling my name. And I knew, okay, there's something there for me when I have the time to go sit down and read it, and when I have the money to go buy the book. And eventually I just sat down with it there in the bookstore and just thought, okay, well, something about this is for me, and I want to find out what it is. And it was just this really cool rabbit trail that it led me down. And like I said, just so many elements of self-discovery that came out of that that have been transformative in so many different ways. And not just for me, but I think also for other people in my life, to be able to explain to them what I was finding out about myself, and also to learn better coping skills based on my sensitivity. So, instead of going to a friend's party and feeling like I had to stick it out and had to stay the whole time and had to put on a happy face and just, pretend like I had all the energy in the world, little things like finding out, okay, well, when I'm in a crowd, especially a crowd of extroverts, my battery's going to go down a lot faster. And so what I need to do is plan a time that works for me and have an exit strategy, make the most of the time that I'm there and I have that energy, but also not feel bad about saying, okay, I need to head out. And so it's everything that comes with it. It's the initial awareness, I think, is huge, but then also the depth of understanding that we can gain about the trait and about ourselves. And I think the third step that I've seen played out in my journey, but also in others, is this awakening. And Robbie, I think you alluded to that a little bit earlier, waking up to the beauty of the gift that we have inside of us, and waking up to the beauty of the gifts that come with the trait, and learning how to channel those and really put those to work in our lives. I think is just this incredible process that unfolds as we go through our journeys. And that's the framework I often use with my clients, is that awareness, understanding, awakening process, because it really is a way that we can settle into our own skin, and then not just survive as highly sensitive people, but thrive and really build the vibrant and fulfilling lives that we desire.
Woo!
Oh my gosh. Yes.
Absolutely. I mean, if ever if ever anybody needs to do an advert for highly sensitive people, it's like, get Josh on. Josh can tell it you all in a, like, everyone's going to want to be highly sensitive if you're not careful. So, let's not, let's not be too positive about it. I'm joking. And what was really coming to my mind as you were speaking then was reminding me about the episode we did about permission, because it feels like that, okay, maybe we're putting off looking into this, but eventually, I think the more that there is awareness around high sensitivity, the more highly sensitive people are going to be drawn to finding out a little bit more. And yes, you can listen to a podcast, you can read a book, you can go, oh, that's me. But then what? And I think it feels to me that then there has to come some permission from within to embrace it, and to start to bring it into our everyday life in ways that you've just explained, and other ways that we've talked about in other episodes. would you agree? Do you think that there is an element of permission, like permission to be highly sensitive?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because I think for me, now that I know that I'm highly sensitive and I realize that that is an aspect of who I've been all my life, I'm all about raising that awareness. It's one of those things where I think it almost breaks my heart to think about the number of children growing up who have this trait, who have no clue just because it's not shared about enough, because not enough people are talking about it. I mean, if we go with the different percentages that people have put out there, where between 20 to 30% of people are highly sensitive and have this genetic trait, and then you think about logically how many people actually know. I mean, I'd be surprised really if maybe more than 1 in 10, could be closer to 1 in 100 people actually have heard the term and know what it means. Not just the negative stereotypes that put people into kind of the namby-pamby box, as I think of it.
Yeah.
But there's so much misunderstanding around the trait and what it actually means. And because of that, I think there are so many children who are growing up highly sensitive and have no clue. And so they're going through the same struggles that we've all gone through. And my thought is, what if we can cut down that learning curve? What if we can share the message in a way that is relatable, that's real, that's vulnerable, that even if somebody can find out in their teenage years and start adjusting their lives accordingly and embracing their strengths at that point, how phenomenal would that be? And what would that movement look like and that revolution look like if this became an everyday subject of conversation? And so to me, that raising awareness is a huge aspect of what I love to do through LinkedIn and through being a guest when I can on podcasts, because it's something everybody needs to know about, whether they are highly sensitive. If they know more than three other people, they know somebody who's highly sensitive. And so, it helps them, especially if they are an HSP, to know how to better structure their lives and embrace their strengths. But even if they're not, if, it could be that they're raising a highly sensitive child, and how much more would that child benefit from a parent who knows about their sensitivity, who knows some of the struggles they might face, and who can be right there alongside them and not be wondering why does my child have so many breakdowns, or why do they seem so stressed, or why aren't they like their siblings, and all those questions that come up when it's one of those things where just a little bit of awareness goes a long way, I guess. Um, and so I think all of that is huge. And then back to the awakening side of it, like you were saying, it just informs so much of how we live and how we operate and how we keep track of our energetic batteries. But it also, I think, is huge in that for those of us who are deeply compassionate and empathic, it helps us understand, oh, there's a biological reason, there's a genetic reason why I've always been able to look at people and see the best in them and believe in them, even when they can't believe in themselves, and why I've always desired to walk alongside people and cheerlead them, just by nature, because I see so many incredible gifts and so much potential in them. And I think for me, that was one of the other cool things about my highly sensitive person journey, was the idea that I suddenly knew so much more about why I was wired the way that I was. But I also was able to say, oh, this is a gift that I was born with. And this is why I've always seen the best in people. And this is why I've always wanted to coach people, for lack of a better term. And I just didn't realize that it was innate, that it was, that was a gift that was there the whole time. And so now it's like, oh, I can use this even more, because now I know why I'm wired the way that I am, and why I have such, deep compassion for those who are struggling and who are looking for answers, and who just need somebody to believe in them and to walk with them through life.
Yes. And what a gift you give them by just being that in the world. That is
Yeah.
amazing. I'd love to circle back a second in what you're
Sure.
talking about with children, because, oh my gosh, this is a topic that Philip and I chat about too. It's because what a difference, like you're talking about kind of early intervention, what a difference we could be making in the lives of highly sensitive children, yes, but also their families and society. If at those early stages, we were not only recognizing what they needed and being able to give it to them, but helping them to see their gifts from that early, when they're already, like you talked about, as kids, we're already kind of allowing our intuition, for example, to flow. Like we haven't yet learned, oh, we shouldn't do that, or we shouldn't tell people that, or whatever. And then being able, I imagine kids being in an environment where that was nurtured. And I just think about, gosh, where could they be as adults if their life was full of recognition and nurturing and helping them to learn how to regulate their own system, right, and give themselves what they needed. And that not only was it okay that they were different, they're not broken, but in fact, they're adding something really cool to the world because of who they are, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. That's beautiful. I love the way you express that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. I don't know. Do you have children, Josh?
I do not.
No. So I'm the only one here who does, but I cannot, not that I'm just saying I can speak about children like from my own experience. I'm still not, I've got 2 boys who are teenagers, and I think they might both be highly sensitive, but I think they both experience it in different ways, but I'm not 100% sure, which is really interesting because I thought I would know. I mean, so, you know, anybody who's listening who is not sure, then, you know, I like to think I know quite a lot about high sensitivity, and I'm not 100% sure because I can't have that, the sort of the real deep, meaningful conversation I need to have with them yet because they're not ready for it. But I do think they both display some behavior that leads me to think that their overwhelm is coming from stimulation of their senses, and I do think they might be, but also I'm open to that. Clearly, I mean, I don't necessarily want them to, you know, I'm not making them be highly sensitive, but if they are, I mean, that's amazing. And anything that they do that's worthy of praise, I try, you know, I praise, especially if it's to do with how they, I think I told a story a few weeks ago about my son, my oldest, sort of saying to me that he in the dark, he chooses a different way to walk home than the other way because he gets a spidey feeling about not going the other way. And I was saying to him, listen to that. You know, if that is coming up in you, listen to that. It's really important because there is something in you that you don't have to understand, but there's something in there that is telling you not to go that way and to go the other way. You know, really listen to that. Because we've all got lots of stories that we can tell about times that we've gone against our intuition, you know. So yeah, and it, you know, just little things like that, it can make a, well, I suppose it's not little, but it, you know, it can really make a difference. On that note, can I ask you, Josh, so, you know, I've got 2 boys, and I'm wondering how I hope this is, I don't know if this is an okay question, and but how does it show up for you? I mean, it might be that it's exactly the same as me, but what I'm wondering is, does it present itself differently, high sensitivity, to you because you're a man, or just because you're you? Because it shows up in all different ways. But I was do you know what I mean?
I believe so. So I think one thing I would recommend to the listeners is on that same website, hsperson.com, there is a test for, is your child highly sensitive?
Yeah.
And so that can be a great place to start. And what I found in looking at it myself and looking at it through the lens of, you know, little Josh growing up, was that I would have checked off pretty much every single box. And I think my mom or dad, looking back at it, would have checked off every single box. And so many of the elements that you find there are related to intelligence, you know, asking really deep, intelligent questions from a very early age. I think oftentimes HSP kids are the ones who might get labeled as old souls.
Okay.
And so, and that's something that I know was part of my childhood and part of how I was wired early on. You know, it was one of those things, always asking odd questions or deeper questions, I think, than what was normal for my age. Not just, you know, the cuz why that a lot of kids ask, but more, you know, why, and then a follow-up, and wanting to know more and more, and wanting to understand how everything in the world worked and how it all fit together. And so I think if you have a child who demonstrates that desire, that depth of processing, that desire to know the inner workings of things, and especially if they demonstrate extreme empathy for their peers or for family members, that also can be a huge clue to high sensitivity. And I think for me, empathy is probably the trait out of the DOES acronym that I've always related to the most, just because I've always felt like not only did I feel my own emotions, but I felt other people's as well. And it was an odd thing, and for years and years I didn't understand exactly what it was. And then I began to understand it, and I wondered, okay, how do I turn this off, or how do I soften what I'm receiving from other people? And we could dive into that later potentially. But I think kids who are very compassionate and highly empathetic, that can be a sign of high sensitivity. If they come home and they talk about a friend of theirs who's struggling at school, or if they go over to a friend's house and they come back and tell you about their family and they're concerned about their friend's well-being, or about something that they heard or said or saw, those are two very big clues, I think. And then the other element would just be with the, what you talked about, you alluded to a little bit about the overstimulation. If they seem constantly stressed or burdened emotionally, if they often kind of withdraw to themselves and cry, or spend a lot of time alone. And that's something that I did, and part of it was related to the family I grew up in. My parents were amazing, my sister's great, but there were times when it was a very turbulent household, and times where I felt like my emotions on top of everything else going on was too much. And then I needed to take that and process it on my own. And then when I got myself under control, I would come back around. And that kind of stuffing feelings and isolating was a very unhealthy pattern that I had to break. And it led to some very negative outcomes along the way, or poor choices. So that's something that I would look for in your kids is, do they tend to stuff their feelings? Do they tend to isolate and then come back around? Or do they feel like they can be open and vulnerable with you? And to kind of tie everything up that we've been talking about with my friends, one of the neat things has been talking with them about identifying their children, whether or not they're highly sensitive. And with one of my friends in particular, she looked at the, is your child highly sensitive test, and basically said, yeah, he checks all the boxes. And I had a theory that was true, but I wasn't going to slap a label on her child. And, one of the questions she had was, well, when do I talk about this with him? And I feel like that's a question that only the parent themselves can answer. But I think when your child comes to you with questions that fall within the lines of high sensitivity, and they start asking questions that imply that they're on the right track to figuring that out, that's a good time. And so when they ask, why am I so different from my classmates, or why do I feel things so much deeper than others, or why do I have this keen sense of injustice that other kids don't seem to have, those are all clues to me that they're on the right track of figuring out that they're sensitive, and that maybe that's the time to introduce it. But again, that's, every parent's choice. But I think especially if you notice that your child is feeling things on a very deep level and carrying a lot of emotional weight, then whether or not you dive into the subject of high sensitivity, or whether you just give them some coping skills and help them to figure out how they can share, and you just remind them that you're always a safe place for them to share whatever they're feeling and whatever they're experiencing. I think just leaving that door open, if nothing else, is a huge step in the right direction. And the rest will take care of itself. And like we were talking about with intuition, I think with your kids, at least again, from in my experience with my nieces and nephews and with my friends' children, there's just an intuitive knowing of that child seems to be very sensitive. I wonder if they are, and introducing that to their parents so they can make their own decisions. But just honoring that intuition. And if it feels like the right time to have a conversation around this subject with them, then I would say go for it. And if it feels like it's a little bit too early still, and you just want to give them some coping skills to help them with their big emotions until the timing feels right to really dive deep, then that's great too. As long as they're supported, then it's fantastic either way.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's that support and that nurturing of who they are, not the label that's on it.
Yeah,
it's the nurturing
absolutely.
of who they are. And everything you've just said just still leads me to believe that both my kids in different ways are highly sensitive, which is really, I hope they are. Yeah, such wise words there. And I suppose why we're just talking about that, you were mentioning coping skills. So I wondered if you'd got anything that you could share that would be useful to anybody who's listening to this, thinking, yeah, you know, I need some help to help my, well, to help me or to help my child, like we're talking about at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the biggest things for me that I've been doing a lot lately is box breathing. And so I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, but that's something that's been extremely helpful. And I don't, it's one of those things I think everyone kind of has a slightly different interpretation of what it is. But for me, and when I share it with others, what I often tell them is, breathing in for a count of 4, holding it for a count of 4, breathing out for a count of 4, holding that for a count of 4, then breathing in again. So you have that box basically, or that pattern.
Yeah.
And then what I often recommend to people is see if you can extend that a little bit each time. So if you can extend your inhalation, so you're breathing in deeper and more from the diaphragm, because oftentimes when we start out with box breathing, I think we start up here instead of down in our diaphragm. And so I encourage them, take a deep breath, run through it a couple of times, but then each time try and extend that count of 4 a little bit more and slow yourself down even more. Because I think it works on 2 different levels. One is it takes our focus off whatever has stressed us because we're focused in on our breathing. And then obviously just in regulating our nervous system, because we're slowing down, because we're getting more oxygen to our body and to our brain. That's one of the first places I start when I notice that I'm starting to feel a little bit frazzled or stressed. One of the things for me is walks in nature. And I think just stepping away from whatever the stressful situation is, if it's possible at that moment. Obviously at work, box breathing is going to be a better coping strategy than walking out of the office and not talking to anybody. But even if you can get away on your lunch break and just take a few minutes to be outside and catch your breath and enjoy nature, I think for empaths and for highly sensitive people, that nature and especially running water are both very healing for us, and sometimes can wash that stress away. Even just getting into a shower and taking a shower to physically feel that washing the stress away is something that has been recommended to me and that I found very helpful. But just getting present, just slowing down, those are both things that work really well. And box breathing is something that you can teach a child early on, that can help them slow down and really get back in touch with themselves. And what I've noticed with my friends' kids is that sometimes what I'll do, if I notice one of them in particular just seems very frazzled or very stressed, is just encouraging them like, hey, let's step over here for a minute, and think of something like, hey, help me hang up these clothing hangers in the closet. And it gets them physically doing something away from whatever the stress is. And they also have that chance to talk to you one-on-one, even if it's just like, hey, let's go walk the dog, or anything along those lines that unplugs them. And it teaches them that it's okay to step away from something that's stressing you out and to relax and unplug for a minute and then come back when you're ready. And I think along the lines, like you were saying with the episode on permission, so often we feel like I have to figure this out right now. I have to have all the answers right now. And the reality is that you don't. 99% of the time, you can take a break, you can unplug, you can relax for a minute and come back to it. And chances are, in that process of recharging, you're going to be better equipped to take on whatever challenge was there to begin with, whether that's a child or whether that's as an adult. And I know for me, when I get the most stressed, now it clicks in, but it's taken a long time to make it that instinctual, okay, for some reason this has me super frazzled and I don't know what it is exactly, but I'm going to step outside on the front porch for a while, catch my breath, and then I'll come back, instead of feeling like I have to be able to address this right away, and I have to have all the answers, which I don't know why. And I don't know if that's a universal thing or not. I don't know why that I'm wired that way, but so often it's like, well, I'll give myself a break when I figured this out or when I get done with this. And it's like, no, take the break now, relax, catch your breath, and come back when your battery's a little bit more full. Instead of putting more pressure on, which generally I think as highly sensitive people, that extra pressure is just really not healthy for us. It's not good. And it shuts down so many of the neural pathways that our natural curiosity opens up if we feel stressed or pressured or we feel like there's a hard deadline that we have to have this figured out right away.
Oh my gosh. So. It's gold, everything you just shared there. And, as I was listening to you, it's just reminding me that a lot of these things that are super helpful for us as highly sensitive people, but would benefit most of the population. Like, in so many cultures, things just feel really fast and like go, 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 go. And you have to know the pressure to know it all and to do all the things, and how valuable it is to be able to give ourselves the space and the permission to, let's take a break from that a second. Let's go out in nature. Let's move away from the crowd and do a quiet activity, right? All of these things, which actually then get us in a place where we can hear the answers, right? Or where things do start firing again. Those are great. I thought those were great examples. And the breathing, like you said, so easy to do in most any environment you're in, and no one has to know you're doing it. Right. Yeah. So it doesn't have to be, if you're feeling self-conscious because you're, sharing a cubicle with somebody or something, they don't have to know what you're doing, but you can still take that time and reset your nervous system.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah. And, if needs be, you can just step away, to the loo or something, can't you? I was telling somebody to do that. How am I going to cope at this big meeting? And I was like, well, if you need to, just get yourself out of the room and just have a couple of minutes to regroup and, look yourself in the mirror and a few breaths and tell yourself you've got it. And then you can go back. But these are all really great examples and ideas of things to do when we are in that situation. Before we just move on, I just wanted to mention one other thing that I think for children who are finding going to new places, or so for one of my children, it was going to school every day. They were finding it really, really tough to settle down and be with all the noise and all those people. So what we did is they took something from home, something little that they took in their pocket, and when they were feeling overwhelmed, they could touch that thing. It was like a touchstone, so they could touch it in their pocket and just sort of know that was something from home and something that made them feel a bit like, oh, it's okay. So it was just something to help ground them in the moment. And that can be, and I think that could help all of us as adults as well. I think that is something really easy and really quite small, but that could help. I think I've definitely done it before.
Absolutely. I've taken from different walks I've been on, taken a piece of bark and brought it back with me, or a rock from the creek and brought it back, and just, rubbed my hand over that a little bit too. Because again, it helps us create that mindful environment to be fully present, to draw ourselves back from catastrophizing or wherever our mind is trying to go, and brings us and helps us just to get present. And so that's beautiful. I love that you did that. And I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And he used it for about 6 months, and then, well, he lost a couple along the way and we had to keep replacing them. But he chose my lovely piece of tiger's eye and then promptly lost it. But we got another one, and it's just little, I don't know, things that I suppose I perhaps might not have thought about before. And somebody suggested that too. It wasn't my original idea. I can't take the credit for that, but it really worked. So I just wanted to share that. And I love the way this conversation has gone, but we have sort of gone off on a brilliant tangent and talking about these things. But I would love to just pull it back, if that's okay, to talk about you as a highly sensitive man. And thank you for sharing your story and your coping strategies, and some of them that have been useful. But I'd really love to know what it's like to be a highly sensitive man now. And have you seen a change in that over the last couple of years? Have you 5 years been able to talk about it, owning that? What is it like?
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting. And I'll give you an example from over the weekend, just because it was kind of funny the way it unfolded. I was I was talking to somebody about the second Avatar movie that recently came out and has been streaming, and I mentioned watching it and that I had cried in the theaters when I watched it and cried again when I watched it at home. And the lady I was talking to is a sister of a friend of mine type of thing, and she's like, "Oh, you were crying at the movie." And I think before that would have embarrassed me or it would have shut me down, and it was just like, yeah, I did. Because again, I know now that the reason that happens, that's related to the gift of empathy that I have. And why it gets triggered by TV shows and movies, I have no idea. Maybe I suspend disbelief a little bit too much, but I've just realized that there is a depth of compassion to me that's an incredible gift, and that's one of the ways that it manifests. And so understanding how I'm wired makes it so much easier to have compassion for myself and to accept myself as I am. And so I think that's one of the things that's been huge is, when I was a kid, it would have been a matter of, okay, I need to wipe my eyes real quick and make sure nobody sees me crying. And I need to pretend like I wasn't if somebody asks. I need to hide these emotions that I'm feeling because what will people think if, which I think is a struggle a lot of us have as highly sensitive, is what will people think? And especially as highly sensitive men, sometimes we just don't understand, where is this coming from? Why do I feel this so deeply? Why am I not more manly or masculine? And I think that that's a whole separate discussion that we could get into, but it's this idea of, so often people create this spectrum of, you have masculinity on one side and sensitivity on the other, and if you're going to be a man, you have to be on this masculine side. And I think what I've noticed, and in my personal opinion, the spectrum is not masculinity versus sensitivity, it's sensitivity versus insensitivity. And I feel like the men who struggle the most are the ones who try to pretend like they don't have feelings, or those who just honestly don't seem to feel any sort of compassion or empathy for anyone else. And I think real strength is not seen in those men who try to be the center of attention and try to browbeat others and try to use their strength to intimidate others. To me, that's not a sign of real masculine strength. Instead, it's the person who comes up and is willing to be open and vulnerable and compassionate, and someone who sees, for those who are fathers, someone whose instinct is, how do I protect my children, not just on a physical level, but on an emotional level? How do I help create a safe space for them, like you were talking about, Robbie, so that they know that whatever they're struggling with, they can come to me? Because to me, that's the real masculine man, is the one who can be open and vulnerable with his children. Someone who can see a coworker struggling and pull them aside and say, hey, are you okay? And deal with them on an empathic level, not the person who needs to look like they have it all together or needs to have a body that's of a certain type so they can intimidate people. To me, those are the people who demonstrate the most insecurity. And I feel like if anything, if there's a masculinity there, it's the toxic masculinity that often gets spoken about. Again, I think so often the media will portray any sort of masculinity as toxic, and I don't think that that's true. I don't think that it's healthy to shut down boys from wanting to be men and wanting to have rough and tumble play, but it's about what's behind that. What's the motive behind it? If you're looking at your dad who intimidates people and gets mad and lashes out, and that's your identity, your source of what it means to be masculine or be a man, I think that can send very confusing signals. And I think that that's where, instead of those stereotypes, the macho action hero stereotypes that go around of this is what it means to be a man, I think we need more highly sensitive men to embrace their sensitivity, to embrace the depth of compassion and empathy that they have, and to demonstrate that, so that it's not so much, look at me, look how invulnerable I am, but instead it's, whatever you're feeling, I want to be in there with you and support you and walk alongside you. And I think that that's something that learning I was a highly sensitive person has given me, is that ability to no longer feel ashamed of my compassion or empathy or my emotions when they come up, but just to be open and real about it, and to be vulnerable, and to not back away from supporting others, because what will people think if I sit down next to them, put my arm around them and cry with them? That doesn't matter to me. What matters is that that person gets the help and support that they need. And I think we can only really do that when we begin to embrace the innate qualities that come with high sensitivity and be willing to be ourselves and be authentic, even if that means expressing emotions that aren't traditionally manly, even if that means, I think one of the other things that does is it gives us permission to follow our intuition more and to speak up and be courageous in a sense that we might not otherwise, because, well, you know, the people around me don't agree with this viewpoint. And, for a guy, so often it's that peer pressure of, well, the group is making fun of this person for this reason. And if I disagree with them or call them out on that, then, that could alienate me from the group. And, if I want to be one of the guys, I need to fall into this mold. And to me, that's not important anymore. And what's more important is that if I hear, even if they're friends of mine, saying something that's out of line, I'm more than willing to stand up for that other person and to confront my friends and just say, hey, that's not right. Like, to stereotype that person, to act like they have no value because they live a different life or believe something different than you. Like, that's not what that's not what a healthy, authentic person does. And that's not the kind of love and acceptance that person needs. And so there are so many different elements and so many ways that conversation could go. But I guess, to me, it's figuring out, what does it mean for me to be authentic to myself and to the way that I'm wired as a highly sensitive person, and how do I honor that, rather than so many of the subjects that you guys have tackled, as far as, rather than feeling like I need permission to be myself, rather than feel like I need to conform or people please, in order to blend in. And instead, I think the more we get in touch with our authentic selves, and especially the sensitive side of our authentic selves, the more we really come to life, and the more we can have a positive impact on the lives of the people around us, and especially the lives of the people that we love.
Oh my gosh.
Boom.
I got chills when you were talking, like literal chills, Josh. I mean, what you're describing is so beautiful to me. First of all, your own authenticity, right? Like, just my language would be loving yourself enough, having enough self-love to just follow your own intuition, follow your own guidance, and be who you are in the world, which is compassionate, right? You are someone who is there for other people. You're very empathetic. And I mean, that's how we change culture, right? That's how we change the world, is by people who are brave enough, like you, to do those things, to be who you really are. And then it creates these ripple effects, because as you're then doing that and modeling it, right, other people are then thinking, oh, well, here's a different way to be a man, right? Because I think that's part of the problem, in my opinion, is that we've had for so long this is what it means to be a woman, this is what it means to be a man, and they're very restrictive and not at all encompassing of the multitudes of people. And
Exactly.
so you being yourself, it creates a model for others. And it also, I'm gonna go back to that word permission again, which is, it gives them permission to be themselves. And I mean, wow, for both men and women to see a man who is strong in that way, of saying what is true for them, of sticking up for other people who maybe don't have the voice, who are compassionate and loving. Like, that is a wonderful way to be masculine, in my opinion. And that's what changes. I always have these lofty things, but that's what changes the world, right? Exactly. People being themselves. So I just want to say, first of all, thank you for who you are in the world. And for being that model, for others, that it's really a wonderful way to be in the world. Just being you it's amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it really is. And my boys don't listen to my podcast. Of course they don't, but I'm going to make them listen to this episode. I really, really am. And, you made a really good point that, so-called toxic masculinity, whether that's just the buzzword for the moment, but this idea of how men should be, Doesn't serve, I mean, it doesn't serve anybody, doesn't serve men, doesn't serve women, doesn't serve anybody, does it? Because, none of us should have to be anyway. In particular, we are who we are. And I think it's also important for us to say that 50% of highly sensitive people are men. It's not more prevalent in women than it is in men. I think I think perhaps there are more women talking about it because it's taking time for men to have the courage like you to be bringing it more to the forefront. But it's innate in equal amounts of women and men. So, come on, highly sensitive people everywhere, let's embrace our high sensitivity and see the strength in it. But you have been such a joy to have as a guest. I feel like we could talk for ages, and I know we could talk for ages. So hopefully you will come back and we can talk about other subjects. But I just think in the interest of time and people listening, it might be a good place to start wrapping up. But before we do, Robbie, was there anything you wanted to say before we finish with Josh?
I mean, just my utter gratitude. Like I said, I think that I love the messages that you put out into the world. I think, as Philippa stated earlier, like if we need anybody who can really tout the wonderfulness of being a highly sensitive person, like just call Josh. Like I think you're just you're a beautiful light in our community, and I'm just so glad that we got to have this conversation. I'm looking forward to more in the future. Yeah. And thank you so much for sharing your story and the work that you do in the world and just who you are. I think you're a really wonderful person. It was lovely to talk to you today. And I'd love for people to know how they can get in touch with you. We'll have it in the show notes, but any shout out you want to give here, we'd love to give you that forum.
Okay. Yeah. So wow. Well, thank you for your kind words, both of you, and just for having me on and letting me be a guest. It is a privilege to be here and to be able to share these things. And I appreciate you giving me a little bit of leeway and just expressing my thoughts and following where those wanted to go. So the best place to find me on social media would be LinkedIn. I'm there. I'm on there every single day. I post pretty much every day or every other day. And so that's a great place to get started, especially in my featured section. There are a lot of freebies, free ebooks, and guides. I actually wrote one that covers a lot of what we talked about earlier. That awareness, understanding, awakening model is in an ebook that I wrote that I think of kind of as a handbook for highly sensitive people that I wish someone had handed me when I first learned that I was highly sensitive, and would have saved a little bit of the learning curve that was there. And so some of the best lessons and coping skills I've picked up are in that ebook. But there also is a quiz on there that I created recently about burnout and a way to assess whether or not we're living on the edge of burnout or the brink of burnout, as I call it. So for even if people are listening or watching this that aren't necessarily highly sensitive, but are just very compassionate, that's a great place to go, and they'll get some coping skills and lessons out of that quiz if they follow that through. And then the other place they could go is just to my website, thesuccesscycle.com. And they can discover more of those resources on there. And either way, if people have questions, if they have things that they'd like to talk about, they can DM me through LinkedIn or email me through my website. And I'd love to have those conversations and see where those go and support them however I can.
Wonderful. Please go and check Josh out. We'll put all the links in the show notes, as we've said, but he has so much to share and so much wisdom, and is just an all-round wonderful person. So go and check him out. And before we go, Josh, was there anything that we haven't asked you that you want to say?
No, the couple other kind of stray thoughts I guess I can share real quick. One is on the subject of highly sensitive men. There is that documentary coming out soon. Maybe by the time this airs, Sensitive Men Rising. That should be, I believe, will be an incredible documentary, and that will be a great introduction and will also be a great way of raising awareness around this subject. And so I definitely encourage people to check that out. And so that would be one resource that people could find that could be very helpful and hopefully will will make this more of an everyday subject of conversation. And then the other thing would just be the Highly Sensitive Person Summit, or the HSP Awakening Summit, that we're all a part of, coming the first week of October. And so obviously they can follow along with your show, or with LinkedIn. There are several people involved in that who are sharing. And as we get closer to October, especially, we'll be talking about it even more. But with the caliber of speakers that we've brought on board, I think that that's going to be an amazing event for raising awareness. And also just with the variety of subjects, I think whether people are in business, whether they're entrepreneurs, whether they are a highly sensitive parent or the parent of a highly sensitive child, there are going to be amazing lessons and sessions and resources and interviews in that event that could be potentially life transforming for people. And so I just highly encourage everyone to follow along with the HSP Awakening Summit as well, as we get closer to that in October.
Yeah. I can't believe it. I think that did come into my mind right at the beginning, and then I completely forgot. So yeah, great. You're co-hosting that summit with Jen Corcoran, who I have had on a guest as on my previous podcast, and we're going to be doing we're some of the speakers, but it's just going to be phenomenal. And that event is free as well. So we will put a link in the show notes for you to sign up so that you can be made aware of when it's all live. It's totally free, so just click on the link and register your interest. This episode will go out during August, so the so the summit is in the first week of October, which is HSP, which is international, is it? International HSP?
World HSP Day.
World HSP Day. So the week around that is when the summit is going to be out at the beginning of October. So yeah, come and check us all out on there as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we're going to have you back. We've already talked about having you back to talk about burnout. So we've not recorded that yet, but you will definitely be hearing and seeing from Josh again. But for now, thank you so much. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, same here. Thank you so much for having me and for the amazing work that you guys are doing.
Take care.
Thank you, Josh.
So it's bye from all of us for now. Thanks for listening to HSP Connection. If you've enjoyed it, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any future episodes. Also, we'd really appreciate it if you could rate the podcast and share it with anyone you think might be interested. It helps others find us. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, you can also leave us a review.
To get in touch with us, you can email us at hspconnectionpodcast@gmail.com. And we'd love to hear from you with your thoughts and comments on the episodes and any suggestions you have for future topics and guests.
We are both HSP coaches and speakers. And to find out more about Robbie, go to Robbie Lee, that's leigh.com.
And to find out more about Philippa, go to safeandsupported.co.uk. See you next time.